Detroit was once a flourishing city where some of the most wealthiest people in the world lived. Now it's known as a ghost town. 30% of the city is vacant land, just remnants of what once was. Now, when deciding on how to balance a budget, with such little revenue to work with, our hands are literally tied. We take no pleasure or rejoice in the decisions we make to either cut funding or continue funding for a program. We have to work with what we are dealt with, and we don't take any pleasure in cutting funding from a certain program, especially if they help and advance the community. But unfortunately, when you're working with a city that has so much debt and so little revenue coming in, we have no choice. And unfortunately, we have decided to cut funding for the shelter and homeless assistance programs in Detroit. The reason being is that, of course, these kind of programs, no matter if you're talking about Detroit or any other city in the country, are the first to go when balancing a budget. Programs for the mental health or women's services or juvenile services are always the first ones to go, because we have to combat the major causes of poverty in the city, and that's unemployment and police force and keeping kids out of gangs and creating more crime in the city. So in order for us to continue funding for the police force and continue funding for combating gang violence and helping kids transition from young adult to adult without getting involved in gangs and getting involved in crime, we have to keep the funding for those kind of programs, and unfortunately cut the funding for programs which still obviously help the community, but like I said before, our hands are tied and we have to choose one over the other. Not by choice, but we're forced to. Now, the police department is something that should be the complete last to go. It's something that keeps the community at peace, that keeps people safe, and helps people come into the city. Nobody wants to visit a city where the crime rate is unbelievably high. There's not enough officers to patrol the area. There's no wealthy people living in the area, and no business wants to set up shop there because of the crime rate and because of the unemployment rate. The police department has already received a 10% pay cut and has already working 12-hour shifts. Detroit cops are the lowest paid cops in the whole United States. And half the officers are already on layoffs and have been forced to resign or retire. The budget for the police department has already been cut by $75 million. That means that 380 jobs have been lost. We cannot afford to lose any more cops on duty. Now, a couple months ago, the cops passed out flyers saying, "Enter at your own risk," because there is an unbelievably low amount of cops patrolling an area so infested with crime. It has the highest crime rate in the whole country, Detroit does. And Mayor Bing continues to cut funding from the police force, and that should be the last thing that you should be cutting funding from. If the city is not safe, people will not come here, and people will not seek employment, and people will not feel safe and secure. We need to keep the police force strong to combat crime and to have a safe environment for people to live in. If the city is not safe, nobody is going to come and visit.